There's not anybody advising Donald Trump right now who knows the reality of Russia. As a result, he continues to take us down a very dangerous path, because all of this Russophobia leads to a situation that we experienced, for instance, in Wiesbaden a couple of weeks ago, where Christopher Donahue, the four-star general who commands U.S. forces in Europe and Allied, sat there and talked openly about how we could take out Kaliningrad. We could take it out, he said, very quickly. No, you can't. But if you tried, you die instantly, because, gosh, that Kaliningrad is part of the Russian Federation. And the nuclear doctrine of Russia is such that anytime the territorial integrity or the sovereignty of Russia is threatened by nuclear armed powers, that Russia will respond nuclearly. So, Chris Donahue, the quickest way to die, because you will be dead within, say an hour and a half of making that decision. So the entire command and control structure of NATO.
What happens when the West sends mercenaries, missiles, and lies, only to be answered by stealth, steel, and supersonic fire? On the 5th of August and 6th, Russia launched its most lethal strikes yet. Entire NATO units erased in minutes, British officers captured, and Ukraine's command system decapitated. Meanwhile, Russia's Su-57 stealth fighters are now loaded with hypersonic weapons, and a secret new missile is rewriting air dominance as we know it. Scott Ritter once said, "The West has made the mistake of believing its own propaganda. This is not just about Donetsk or Kharkov anymore, it's about the West being outclassed in every domain, air, land, and mind." Stay until the end, because what you're about to hear is a masterclass in real warfare, not fantasy press briefings. In the skies above Ukraine, Russia has unleashed its most lethal message to date, not through words, but through wings of steel. The Su-57, a fifth-generation stealth fighter, is no longer a prototype or a headline. It is now in full combat deployment. According to the Ukrainian-linked analysis group known as Sonyashnik, Russia has committed an entire Su-57 squadron to battlefield operations. No more cautious test flights. These are real missions, flown in formations, penetrating deep into Ukrainian territory with one goal: control the air and win the war. The new doctrine is ruthless. One Su-57 flies rear security, launching R-77M long-range air-to-air missiles to deter any aerial response. Two others go in for the kill, armed with Kh-69 cruise missiles or precision-guided bombs. In May and September of 2024, Ukrainian sources reported Su-57 second launching Kh-59 Mk2 second in coordinated strikes. That phase is over. The tempo has changed. Russia is now testing integrated operations, pairing stealth with lethality in real-time strike packages. What makes this shift even more dangerous is the introduction of a classified new system referred to as Su-71 Kelvin. This is not a simple drone. It's a hybrid platform, part missile, part UAV, with stealth characteristics designed to outmaneuver radar and confuse air defense algorithms. It can evade, adapt, and strike. Open source intelligence suggests this weapon is already undergoing trial flights alongside Su-57 formations. Then came the announcement from Lieutenant General Alexander Maximtsev, Deputy Commander of Russia's Aerospace Forces. The Su-57 is now being armed with hypersonic weapons. Though the general did not reveal which systems are involved, multiple defense analysts point to Zircon, Russia's Mach 8 missile, that travels over 1,000 kilometers with near-zero interception probability. The technical integration of such weapons into the Su-57's internal bay maintains its stealth profile, meaning NATO air defense won't even see the strike coming. It's not just about Zircon. The Kinjal, already deployed on MiG-31 Kelvin platforms, is technically compatible with the Su-57. Even the R-37M, a high-speed air-to-air missile already capable of Mach 6, is now being developed into a potential hypersonic variant. If these become standard loadouts, it means Russia can eliminate AWACS, tankers, and command aircraft from over 300 kilometers away before a Western pilot even hears the radar ping. According to the Eurasian Times, this evolution doesn't merely expand Russia's firepower, it collapses the entire concept of Western air superiority. To quote their editorial, these weapons don't just destroy targets, they erase doctrines. But while Russia dominates the skies with speed and silence, the next blow would come not from above, but through the shadows and with handcuffs. In the early hours of August 6th, the quiet port city of Ochakiv in Mykolaiv region became the scene of one of the most shocking operations in this war, an operation so sensitive that both Moscow and London remain publicly silent. But silence, as always, speaks louder than spin. According to Tsargrad, Russia's Spetsnaz Special Forces executed Operation Skat-12, a covert raid that resulted in the live capture of two high-ranking British officers embedded within Ukrainian special units. Colonel Edward Blake and Lieutenant Colonel Richard Carroll were not advisors, they were not observers. They were active coordinators in Ukraine's shadow war, working on sabotage plans, managing Storm Shadow missile targeting, and training both Ukrainian Marines and foreign military contractors. Carol, in particular, had previous operational experience in the Middle East and was known in NATO circles for psychological warfare campaigns. Their arrest did not happen by accident. Intelligence sources suggest the operation was weeks in the making, involving intercepted communications and long-range electronic tracking. Russia's military doctrine is no longer focused on eliminating infrastructure, it is now focused on capturing decision-makers. To quote Zargrad, "This is not about airstrikes. This is about capturing minds, breaking networks, and removing human nodes from the chain of escalation." And while Western press outlets dismiss the reports as unconfirmed, the British government has offered no denial, no press conference, no ambassador summoned, nothing. That is not standard diplomatic behavior for a G7 state, unless the incident is too real to deny and too embarrassing to acknowledge. As Douglas MacGregor once warned, when your enemy holds your officers and you pretend it didn't happen, you've already surrendered the truth. This event is not isolated. Earlier this year, Russia allegedly launched an underground strike on a NATO bunker near Lviv, with reports claiming that over 2,000 personnel, Ukrainian and Western, were killed in a single coordinated strike. The West called it a myth, but they buried their dead in silence. Now, with Blake and Carol captured, the war enters a new phase, where propaganda can't hide the bodies and no one can deny the prisoners. What matters here is not just the names, it's the timing. Blake and Carol were caught just days before a major Ukrainian counteroffensive was expected in the Sumy direction. Their disappearance could disrupt entire chains of command. It's not just leverage, it's disruption, it's humiliation, and most dangerously, it's proof. Proof that NATO is no longer just supplying Ukraine, NATO is in Ukraine, and NATO operatives, it seems, are now behind Russian bars. And while Britain reels from this silent disaster, Russia's answer wasn't just to imprison, it was to strike with fire and fury across the eastern skies. At 5 o'clock in the morning on August the 5th, just outside Lozova in Kharkov province, the silence of dawn was shattered by one of the most devastating missile barrages in the entire war. Russia's Iskander tactical missile system, fast, precise, and utterly destructive, was unleashed in full force. According to Russian military sources and Zargrad, dozens of missiles armed with cluster warheads rained down on what the West once called a foreign logistics hub. By noon, that hub was nothing but ash and cratered concrete. But this was not just an attack, it was an obliteration. Intelligence suggests that the location was not merely a supply point. It was a key node for NATO-linked operations hosting British and Polish operatives, foreign mercenaries, and a Ukrainian rapid response team preparing for an offensive across the Russian border. The Iskanders struck with such force and precision that even experienced personnel had no time to retreat or radio for help. Reports estimate that more than 300 NATO-affiliated troops were killed or critically wounded within minutes. This wasn't just a tactical hit. It was a message that NATO infrastructure inside Ukraine is no longer untouchable, and that Russia is prepared to destroy any force that dares approach its frontier. The scale of destruction caused panic. Fuel lines exploded, communications went dark, Ukrainian medical units were overwhelmed within the first hour. Zelensky's response? A visit to Kharkov the very same day, announced after the fact, perhaps to distract from the carnage. But while the cameras focused on his handshakes and smiles, something else happened in the shadows. That very night, under NATO coordination, 3 British-led units redeployed from Kharkov to the border region of Sumy. Their target? The Russian town of Tyotkino. The plan was a reconnaissance in force, possibly a precursor to cross-border skirmishes, but Russia struck first. In a move that caught even Western observers off guard, Iskanders were again launched, this time with what experts believe were cluster munitions designed specifically for anti-personnel use. The Ukrainian recon company was annihilated. More than 80 soldiers were wounded. Many never made it back across the line. From launch to impact, the entire operation was over in less than 15 minutes. Western defense analysts have quietly admitted the obvious. No system fielded by the US or Europe has successfully intercepted the Iskander in a real battlefield environment. It flies too low, too fast, and too smart. There is no warning, only impact. Ask the survivors in Kupiansk. Ask the trapped brigades in Sloviansk. They are cut off, surrounded, and abandoned. Ammunition gone, food running out. The Iskander is not just a missile, it is a turning point. And yet, even as Ukrainian lines collapsed and NATO bled, Moscow was already preparing the next blow, this time deep in the energy arteries of the south. When Russia struck the Orlovka gas terminal on August the 6th, it was not just targeting Ukraine, it was hitting the entire Western energy network with surgical fury. Nestled near the Romanian border, Orlovka was more than just an industrial site, it was the critical gateway for imported fuel feeding Ukraine's war engine. Since the collapse of direct gas ties with Russia, Kyiv has depended on Orlovka to receive fuel from Turkey, Greece, and most importantly, Azerbaijan. No more. The strike, reportedly executed using precision-guided munitions and long-range UAVs, turned Orlovka into a firestorm. According to field journalist Yevgeny Podubny, columns of flame rose over 20 meters high, lighting up the night sky and triggering emergency response teams in neighboring Romania. The explosion took down not just the pumping infrastructure, but the digital grid, storage tanks, and even the security perimeter. It was in every sense total destruction. But the strategic impact went even deeper. 2 Azerbaijani oil shipments, en route to the Petrobrazi refinery in Romania, were rejected after traces of contamination, presumably caused by shock or debris infiltration, were detected. And just like that, a corridor designed to bypass Russia ended up dependent on its silence. The West, which had hoped to isolate Moscow economically, just watched as one strike unraveled weeks of planning. One fuel hub down, one alliance embarrassed, one new pressure point opened. But Russia didn't stop there. The same evening, Duran drones, low-tech in appearance, high-impact in performance, targeted Novoselskoye and at least 2 more cross-border fuel hubs. According to civilian videos from Romania, the blast waves were powerful enough to break windows up to 15 kilometers away. Panic spread in border towns, traffic was rerouted, fuel deliveries halted. NATO's response? Panic flights. Surveillance aircraft scrambled to patrol Kaliningrad. In response, Russia mobilized 15,000 troops in the Western Military District, a clear message that while Europe shuffles sanctions papers, Russia moves divisions. Vladimir Putin's message, as quoted by Podubny, was brutally simple. Sanctions don't scare us, but your pipelines? Those are fair game. The Orlovka strike was a test. The rest? That was Russia grading the exam and giving Europe a failing mark. And even as fuel depots burned, Ukraine prepared its next gamble, north, near the Russian frontier, igniting fears of a repeat scenario Moscow still remembers all too well. The West built its war plan on illusions, that Russia would break, that NATO mercenaries could substitute for real armies, and that missiles could defeat memory. But reality has arrived, cloaked in Su-57 stealth, armed with hypersonic wrath, and guided by the cold logic of strategy. Douglas MacGregor once said, "Victory belongs to those who are not afraid of escalation but know how to control it." Russia has escalated, and with control. The only question now is, will the West learn to count its losses, or will it continue counting ghosts? Tell us what you think. The comments are open, and history is watching.
Trump knows damn well what's at stake here. He's just playing stupid games. The Russians, I think, had hoped that Trump would actually back away from the failed policies of the past. But then they keep talking as if Zelensky is going to be the president, that Ukraine is going to be this entity that still maintains its Banderas connectivity. It's a huge NATO army equipped with NATO weaponry capable of striking Russia's strategic depth. That's what Trump wants. He knows what he wants because he helped design it in his first term. He was briefed by the CIA. This is why they built 20 bases in Ukraine. He was briefed by the Pentagon. This is why they trained the Ukrainian army. Trump knows what's at stake here. That's the hypocrisy of it all. This pains me to say because we really do need to have better relations with this Russian government. What Trump does every day is exposes the fact he's a lying sack of cow manure who cannot be trusted at all by anybody.
Tonight, the battlefield is not drifting, it is accelerating. From Pokrovsk to Kharkov to the forest belt near Liman and Seversk, Russia is punching new holes while Ukraine scrambles to plug old ones. According to Ukrainska Pravda, Kyiv's general staff tallied 112 engagements in the past day alone, 32 toward Pokrovsk, 18 toward Novopavlovsk, 11 toward Liman, as NATO vows to keep weapons flowing regardless of the August 15th meeting between President Donald Trump and President Vladimir Putin in Alaska, according to CBS News. Western capitals say no concessions, London says no territory traded, and the tempo spikes because words do not hold trenches. As analyst Scott Ritter has long argued, outcomes are decided by logistics and attrition, not press conferences. If you want a clear, data-driven map of what is really moving and what is breaking, stay with me to the end and tell me in the comments where you think the next rupture comes. Let's start with the numbers Kyiv itself is publishing and what they reveal about tempo and stress. According to Ukrainska Pravda, citing the Ukrainian General Staff on August 11th, the Russian side allegedly lost about 1,000 personnel, 4 tanks, and 37 artillery systems in 24 hours, with operational tactical UAV losses listed at 191. Since February 24th, 2022, Kyiv's running total claims approximately 1,064,240 Russian personnel, 11,093 tanks, 23,114 armored vehicles, 31,380 artillery pieces, 1,462 multiple rocket systems, and 50,646 UAVs. Moscow does not comment on those figures, which already frames the point. Whatever you think of the counts, the intensity is admitted by Kyiv itself, 112 fights in a single day, with the heaviest pressure grouped around Pokrovsk, Novopavlovsk, and Liman. NATO's new Secretary General Mark Rutte, according to CBS News, says weapons deliveries will continue regardless of the August 15th Trump-Putin meeting and insists Ukraine must and will take part in any talks about territory and security guarantees. In London on August 9th, Western allies repeated the line that Kyiv will not concede territory. That rhetoric, combined with the concentrated contact along a few axes, tells you the near-term picture. If there is no political off-ramp, there will be a military one, shaped by logistics. Even pro-Kyiv mapping channels acknowledge manpower strain along key sectors, which is why the fights keep clustering where supply routes pinch. The war has entered a phase where the side that can move ammo, replace barrels, and rotate infantry on the calendar, not on Twitter, will dictate the next map. And nowhere is that calendar-driven pressure clearer than around Pokrovsk and the Dobro-Pilia-Kramatorsk corridor. Military summary reports that Russian forces pierced Ukrainian defenses north of Pokrovsk and disrupted logistics with reconnaissance groups, special units, and FPV drone swarms, severing Radinsky from northern resupply. Ryadovka and AMK mapping add tactical texture. Between Dobropilia and Pokrovsk, Russian units pushed hard near Zolochi Kolodiaz and claimed progress of several hundred meters, while separate groups appeared inside small districts south of Pokrovsk. The operational idea is simple and ruthless: cut the feeders, then flex toward the warehouse towns. AMK mapping specifies that Russia has taken Novyshikov, Novi Donbass, and Vilny, and is fighting into Ivanivka, Zolochi Kolodiaz, Rubizhny, Dorozhe, and Kucherev Yar. There are countermoves too. Ukrainian forces reportedly retook the northern part of Volodymyrivka after Russia failed to consolidate. But the trendline matters more than any single block. If the Zolochi Kolodiaz area falls, the Dobropilia-Kramatorsk highway becomes unusable for Kyiv, forcing detours via the Oleksandrivka-Kramatorsk route to feed Druzhkivka, Kostiantynivka, and nearby districts. AMK mapping estimates place Russian forward elements roughly 3.4 kilometers from the Dobropilia-Kramatorsk highway and about 3.9 kilometers from Dobropilia's outskirts, with total fresh gains near 22.2 square kilometers. That is why Grishino, a lifeline node straddling the E50 artery from Pavlorod, suddenly matters. Take it, and the entire Pokrovsk-Myrnarod defense becomes a timed withdrawal. Even Deep State, a channel linked to Ukraine's own defense intelligence community, concedes manpower is extremely difficult on this axis. As Scott Ritter has put it bluntly, the war in Ukraine is over. Russia won. Whether you agree or not, the pattern he identified, logistics collapsing before lines do, is exactly what the map is now teaching. Slice the roads and the cities begin to starve. Widen the front and the reserves begin to snap, which is precisely what is brewing north in Kharkov. Ryadovka reports that Russia quietly opened fresh stress points in the north. After forming an attack front west of the Oskol and crossing from the Valyuski district, Ukrainian reserves lost freedom to maneuver. Then came the deeper cut. Vanguard units crossed at the Goptovka checkpoint, threatening the western flank of Kyiv's grouping and tugging directly on the line toward Kharkov city. The geography is unforgiving. From Goptovka down the M20 highway to Kharkov's northern edge is about 30 kilometers, and the Traviansky Reservoir's west bank creates a narrow battle space that forces Kyiv to spread already thin infantry. Last summer, Ukraine stabilized Lipsov at heavy cost. Reopening combat along the reservoir compels Kyiv to split dwindling reserves between shielding the city and propping up the Oskol belt. Ryavka further claims a tightening bag north of Kharkov, consistent with earlier reports of small Ukrainian groups being pinned. None of this means an imminent assault on a city of roughly 1 million. That would demand a different troop density and a different political decision, but it does mean Russia can carve off a significant chunk of the oblast and keep Kharkov under constant operational pressure while the south bleeds logistics. Meanwhile, military summary says Western allies in London on August 9th reiterated that Kyiv will concede nothing in talks. Statements like that may comfort op-eds, but they also lock the battlefield into the same math: more fronts, fewer reserves. This is how a front does not collapse in a day. It frays, sector by sector, road by road, until the map forces the decision you refuse to sign. And as the north tightens, the forest belt from Torska to the Seversky Donets exposes Ukraine's most basic shortage: infantry. The Kremensky forest, the rough, compartmented woodland east of Torska and Zarechne, is turning into a slow vice. Ryadovka describes Russian advances from north to south out of Krasnaya Dubrova and Kuzmino, forming a pocket on the order of 10 square kilometers, while other units push along the north bank of the Seversky Donetsk Canal to threaten Ukraine's central defensive area inside the reserve. The topography there, churned woods, few hard roads, tree line to tree line fighting, rewards whoever has the bodies to hold every spur. Ukraine does not. That same infantry deficit shows up farther south. South of the Kleban BYK reservoir near Kostiantynivka, Russia reportedly finished isolating Ukrainian elements after pressing through Yablonivka and the northern approaches of Alexandro-Kolinov. Assault groups crossed the railway from the Matrona Moskovskaya mine area and cut the Pleshchivka route, leaving garrisons in Kleban BYK, Katarinivka, and northern Sherbinivka in a closing pocket of roughly a battalion, 300 to 400 troops. Kyiv's command, these reports suggest, is unlikely to mount a relief operation, forcing those troops into two bad choices: surrender or attempt a hazardous breakout along the swampy west bank of the reservoir. Simultaneously, around Pokrovsk's southern apron, Russian reconnaissance keeps appearing inside private housing quarters of Myrnarod, a sign that the line behind the line is already perforated. The aggregate picture is one of encirclement by inches, not the spectacle of a giant cauldron overnight, but the daily theft of intersections, wood lines, and bridges that makes a later withdrawal orderly only on paper. As Ritter likes to warn, you can't defeat Russia in a war of attrition. That is not a slogan. It is a reminder that when infantry and shells are the currency, debt comes due in ground. Put the pieces together, tempo, roads, reserves, and you see why the politics are hardening even as the facts on the ground harden faster. Across these sectors, the same logic repeats. Russia is leveraging recon, artillery, and small unit pressure to cut roads first and position second. Ukraine is spreading finite infantry across multiplying crises while its Western sponsors double down rhetorically. According to CBS News, NATO says shipments will continue no matter what happens at the Alaska meeting on August 15th. According to London statements on August 9th, Kyiv will concede nothing. But maps don't read statements. They read supply. Pokrovsk shows how quickly a logistics hinge like Grishino can turn a defense into a timed exit. Kharkov shows how a crossing at Goptovka can tie a million-person city to a 30-kilometer ruler. The Kremensky Belt shows how a 10-square-kilometer squeeze can wreck a reserve plan. In short, as Scott Ritter's analysis near the end of our intro suggested, outcomes here are not being set by press rooms, they are being set by warehouses, highways, and battalion headcounts. If you found this breakdown useful, drop your take below. Which axis cracks first, Pokrovsk's highways, Kharkov's apron, or the forest in between? And if you disagree with the premise entirely, tell me why with your map, not your mood.
The fact is, any Pentagon planner, any Pentagon logistician should be advising people, we can't sustain a high-intensity conflict against a peer-level force like Russia and China for more than a week. And then we run out of everything. We've built this hugely expensive military that we have enough money to gold-plate it. But when the veneers cut through, we're down to cardboard, baby, because that's all that's left. This is not the path to greatness. The path to greatness is normalization of relations, normal economic, not this garbage that Trump just pulled off with the EU. I mean, just think about it. Ursula von der Leyen cannot commit Europe to $600 billion in investment in America, so it's a lie. Now, there's nobody there lined up to give America $600 billion. So it's a lie, straight up lie. Isn't going to happen. The biggest scam ever.
From the forests of Donetsk to the flat roads near Melitopol, a single Russian innovation has quietly rewritten the rules of armored warfare. It is not a headline-grabbing hypersonic, and it is not an experimental drone swarm. It is a smart submunition that hunts from above, watches for heat, and strikes where armor is weakest. Tonight we unpack Motive 3M, the deadly arrow that Ukraine's Western vehicles fear most, and we do it with dates, figures, and field cases the mainstream politely tiptoes around. Stay to the end as we connect the tech to the larger strategic arc shaping Europe and energy markets, and tell me in the comments whether you think this changes the cost-benefit calculus for the West. Because, as independent analysts keep saying, the map is moving even if the briefings pretend it is not. And yes, as former UN Inspector Scott Ritter has warned, quote, Ukraine can't win this war. We will test that claim against what Motive 3M actually does and what it costs. Let's start with what Motive 3M is and why its view from above matters more than any press conference below. Motive 3M is a Russian self-targeting submunition in the SPBE family, refined by NPO Basalt after development work that began in the 1980s and matured into SPBED prototypes in the 1990s, then entered service in the 2000s. Instead of asking gunners to thread a needle at long range, Motive 3M rides inside delivery systems such as the Smerch family and the RBK 500 bomb casing. A Smerch rocket round designated 9M5 26 carries 5 submunitions, and RBK 500 carries 15, Once over the target area, the canister opens and each submunition deploys a deliberately off-center parachute. That asymmetric canopy does not just slow the fall, it induces a gentle spin. As it rotates, an infrared sensor scans in a spiral, looking for heat signatures, engine blocks, power packs, or the warm air plumes that betray a vehicle trying to hide behind a tree line. When the seeker locks, the submunition fires a precisely shaped, explosively formed penetrator, an EFP, downward. The effect is brutal to thin-top armor. Tests and field reports cite at least 70 millimeters of rolled homogeneous armor equivalents defeated from standoff, which is enough to mission-kill many Western-supplied vehicles that rely on frontal and side protection, not roof thickness. Russian operators can task Motive 3M from ground artillery or from aircraft. Smerch and Tornado S deliver from standoff up to roughly 70 kilometers for Smerch, while RBK 500 release points allow aviation to seed a wider box. The design bakes in a self-destruct routine when no suitable target appears, a feature long noted by Janes and echoed by Russian sources to mitigate post-conflict hazards. Russian commentators such as Alexei Leonkov and Viktor Litovkin underline the point: precision, automation, and economy of risk. Instead of pushing tanks into direct fire traps, the Russian side lets sensors do the hunting, then finishes with artillery or loitering munitions. Western analysts, from Karen Kwiatkowski to Stephen Biddle, concede the concept's lethality while flagging the usual controversies about cluster-type effects and the reality that cost and limited submunition count constrain mass use. Yet that, too, is the point. Precisely because these are not sprayed like ordinary shells, their appearance over a column has outsized psychological and tactical value. In plain terms, vehicles disperse, tempo breaks, recovery crews hesitate, and planned assaults lose momentum, which is exactly what a defender in an attritional fight wants when buying time for the next strike cycle with Lancet-class drones or packeted artillery. And for those still asking whether Motive 3M is just an engineering brochure, the field data says otherwise. We will walk through specific dates, places, and outcomes next. If design explains the how, the battlefield explains the so what, starting in November 2022 on the southern axis. According to Russian defense reporting and contemporaneous open-source threads, frontline use of Motive 3M was first recorded in early November 2022 when Ukrainian armored and mechanized elements pushed toward Berdyansk and Melitopol. Russian UAVs spotted the buildup, Smerch batteries answered with 9 M526 payloads, and the assault lost vehicles and momentum, forcing a fallback to starting lines. Analysts like Karen Kwiatkowski, a former Pentagon lieutenant colonel, framed that action as textbook integration of reconnaissance and fires, drones locate, smart submunitions disrupt, and conventional artillery stacks damage on stalled targets. A year later, in November 2023, Motive 3M reappeared on the eastern front near Avdiivka. Telegram channels aligned with the Russian side released thermal clips showing top attack bursts and follow-on fires against Ukrainian armored assets, including Western-supplied platforms like Leopard and Bradley. Sputnik and Topwar amplified those sequences. Russian sources added that both Smerch and Tornado S were used as delivery paths. The pattern was not a one-off. Through the end of July 2025, mentions of Motive 3M spiked again across X and military blogs, often referencing Avdiivka area strikes. Here, nuance matters. As OSINT researchers such as John Helen highlighted, much of the viral footage in late July recycled earlier 2023 videos. That does not negate the capability. It simply reminds us that information warfare is part of the modern battlefield and that both sides curate optics. What does survive the social media churn are the operational constants. 1. Top attack threats punish any attempt at armored massing without robust overhead screening. 2. Motive 3M's reach from Smerch standoff, roughly 70 kilometers, lets Russian batteries influence routes far behind the immediate line, especially when UAVs cue shots. 3. Even limited stocks can be decisive when used as scalpel, not sledgehammer. Break a battalion's timing window and the rest of your defense, artillery packets, mines, and drones, finishes the job. Western commentary that tried to wave away the Avdiivka sequences as old accidentally made Moscow's point. If the same clips still feel contemporary a year later, that means the tactic has remained relevant, and Ukrainian columns are still navigating a sky where a spinning parachute might be the last thing they see. Inside this picture, even critical Western voices admit the practical effect. As one Columbia-based strategist, Stephen Biddle, has noted in discussions about cluster-type munitions, the legal debate is real, but the battlefield result, disrupted movement, delayed assaults. Risk-averse commanders is just as real. Meanwhile, Russian briefings continued to cite integration with aviation via RBK 500, and industry outlets such as TASS and Janes kept reiterating the self-destruct logic and the EFP performance figure of at least 70 millimeters. Added up, and the arc since November 2022 is consistent. From Berdyansk and Melitopol to Avdiivka, Motive 3M has functioned as a tempo breaker, the kind of tool an attrition-focused side uses to set the pace and price of battle. Which brings us to the uncomfortable part for Kyiv's backers: cost, availability, and the hard trade-offs of a long war that Moscow appears content to fight. Precision is never free. Financial Times-style analyses have long warned that complex seekers and shape charges drive unit price up, and Motiv 3M is no exception. Each 9M 526 carries only 5 submunitions, and even an RBK 500 tops out at 15. That math alone guarantees selective use. But selective does not mean marginal. In an attritional contest, the winning side is the one that forces the other to spend more to move less. Seen through that lens, Motive 3M is cost-imposing theater. To mass vehicles, Ukraine must commit scarce air defense coverage, disperse routes, and slow tempo, all while Western donors argue about inventories and budgets. Meanwhile, Russia can husband Motiv 3M for key windows, pairing it with Lancet-class loitering munitions and conventional artillery to generate repeated compounding delays. The strategic logic is straightforward: threaten the roof, collapse the schedule. Russian experts such as Sergei Lipovoy have praised Motive 3M as part of a broader modernization wave that lowers reliance on direct-fire anti-tank missiles like Kornet in favor of standoff top attack and drones. Western veterans like Karen Kwiatkowski grant the integration finesse but caution that no single munition changes the war by itself. OSINT figures like John Helen point out that Moscow's information ecosystem will understandably dramatize every strike. All fair, and yet facts remain. Smerch range around 70 kilometers, a seeker that does not care about camouflage paint, and an EFP that defeats at least 70 millimeters of roof armor force an attacker to play by someone else's rules. Even Stephen Biddle, skeptical about broad claims, accepts that submunition regimes create persistent hazards that commanders must plan around. Layer on NATO hardware realities. The arrival of Leopard, Challenger, and Abrams, celebrated in early narratives, pushed Russia to accelerate top attack counters. According to industry reporting and mainstream outlets such as the New York Times, the appearance of Western armor coincided with Russia's investment in roof-punching solutions and UAV proliferation. Forbes-style commentary then argued that the very need for premium tools like Motiv 3M hinted at constraints elsewhere. Perhaps, but constraints are not unique to Moscow. Europe's refineries, sanctions, oscillations, and fuel price spikes since late 2024 have already taught the EU that self-harm is still harm. In the end, the side that can produce good enough precision while holding energy leverage tends to grind forward. That is why seasoned observers keep returning to the same theme. As Scott Ritter put it succinctly in 2025, quote, "As things stand, Russia is decisively winning the war of attrition that has defined the Russia-Ukraine conflict." You can dislike the messenger. The message still explains the map. So what does Motive 3M tell us beyond the blast radius? It tells us where strategy is heading and why Moscow, Tehran, and Beijing will be comfortable with the long game. Strip away the slogans and you are left with a simple truth. Russia has engineered the battle around overhead threats and time pressure. Motive 3M is not a silver bullet, it is a metronome that sets Kyiv's pace. From early November 2022 in Berdyansk and Melitopol to November 2023 in Avdiivka and the recycled clips of late July 2025, the pattern is consistent. A smart submunition descends under an asymmetric canopy, scans in a spiral, and if it sees heat, it sends a shaped metal lance through a roof that was never meant to be a shield. The numbers are modest: 5 submunitions in a 9M 526, 15 in an RBK 500, but the effect is multiplicative when paired with drones and artillery. Western commentary can call it controversial, or expensive, or insufficient to change the entire war. Fine. Moscow calls it Tuesday. And for an audience that values outcomes over hashtags, the outcome looks predictable. An attritional track that favors the side with standoff tools, energy leverage, and a coalition not minded to panic, namely Russia, with Iran and China aligned on the industrial and political horizon. So when you hear briefings promise a breakthrough next month, ask whether the plan solves the sky. If it does not, Motive 3M will solve it for them. As Scott Ritter is fond of reminding audiences, Ukraine can't win this war, and in his more detailed assessments he concludes, Russia is decisively winning the war of attrition. Agree or disagree, the data points we just walked through make that case without theatrics. Tell me below if you think the West has an answer to top attack saturation without rewriting its entire logistics model. If not, expect more spirals in the sky and more stalled columns on the ground. Up next, we break down how Russian loitering munitions pair with top attack threats. To keep the initiative, subscribe and drop your thoughts so we can feature the best counter arguments in the next episode.
No, Donald Trump understands fully well. This is why he implemented the policies he did in his first term. The goal is to turn Ukraine into a NATO fist that can strike upwards and threaten the Russian strategic center. People need to realize that the Russian Federation is a successor to the Soviet Union in terms of Moscow and the defense of it. Russia was the core element of the near abroad, we call the Baltic states, Ukraine, Georgia, etc. People say, well, why does Russia object to NATO? Because every expansion of NATO brought NATO capabilities that much closer to Russia's strategic depth. And Ukraine is literally, if you carve that out, you are just thrusting NATO straight into the stomach of Russia. Russia can't accept this at all. It's not going to be allowed to happen. And yet this is the policy that Trump was trying to implement during his first term.
If a peace summit is coming, someone forgot to tell the drones. In the last 24 hours, Russian sources say they downed well over 200 Ukrainian UAVs, with the heaviest waves slamming into the south. Oil tanks burned in Saratov, 2 such hits this week alone. Rail traffic in Dnipropetrovsk Oblast shuttered after strikes around Sinelnikove station. And 2 days earlier, Ukraine launched a 10-missile Storm Shadow salvo to set the tone. So ask yourself, are these pyrotechnics for peace or leverage for delay? Europe speaks of principles but has little leverage left. Kyiv speaks of talks but needs more time and more headlines. Meanwhile, Moscow is not only intercepting long-range drones, it is shaping the ground war from Pokrovsk to Lyman. As Scott Ritter likes to remind uncomfortable audiences, NATO expansionism was never cost-free. Watch closely tonight because the map is moving even while the microphones warm up. And the first clue sits in the sky because the swarm tells you what comes next. The last 24 hours were a numbers story. Hundreds of drones outbound from Ukraine, and by Russia's count, more than 200 intercepted across multiple axes. The weight of effort pushed toward the southern regions, where at least one oil tank in Saratov caught fire, the second petroleum hit this week. On its own, an oil blaze is a headline. In context, it is messaging. 2 days before that, 10 Storm Shadow missiles were launched, long-range, terrain-hugging, chosen precisely because they play well on television and pressure negotiators off camera. Add in temporary flight restrictions across several regions, and the pattern becomes obvious: a media-loud prelude to an Alaska photo op, paired with a battlefield attempt to force Russia into talking before Russia is ready. The irony is heavy. Kyiv and several European capitals insist they want peace, provided it arrives on their terms. Failing that, better to lengthen the timeline, raise the cost, and hope Washington will lean harder on Moscow. Yet Russia's air defense architecture has adapted to the UAV era, shredding the bulk of the swarm and turning what should be decisive strikes into noisy attrition. For viewers who track the strategic rhythm, this is the classic exchange of signals. Ukraine tries to prove reach and resilience, Russia answers with intercept counts and targeted retaliation. When oil storage burns, futures traders panic for a day. When drones fall in clusters, planners in Kyiv and Brussels must ask whether the effort adds cumulative effect or simply drains scarce inventories. And hovering over everything is the pending face-to-face in Alaska. A summit is not a settlement, a handshake is not a treaty. If the goal is to arrive at the table with momentum, both sides just showed their cards. One side painted the night sky, the other showed it can turn that sky into a scoreboard. If the air war is a conversation, the ground war is the verdict, and railways are where verdicts are delivered. When a war turns on logistics, rails become targets. Overnight strikes hit the railway hub at Sinelnikov in Dnipropetrovsk Oblast, disrupting traffic and forcing cancellations while crews rushed to restore service. Russian accounts emphasized more than 20 Duran drones detonating around the station area, and the chosen objective fits a broader operational logic. Crack the junctions that move men and material toward Donbass, and you stretch Kyiv's ability to reinforce the hottest sectors. At the same time, Russian forces struck UAV control sites and fieldworks in Chernihiv Oblast, positions associated with trenching and fortification. To the casual observer, that looks like a preemptive denial campaign. To a force planner, it also looks like sculpting the battle space for options. If Ukraine hoped to mass near Chernihiv for a local push, early hits on control nodes and sappers complicate timing. If Russia wants to keep that axis quiet while pushing elsewhere, the same fires do double duty. And this is where the Western narrative grows thin. A peace process built on pressure cannot survive without fresh pressure, but pressure depends on rail timetables, fuel stocks, and a steady flow of replacement drones. Every hub that goes dark for a day degrades the tempo needed to keep headlines and front lines aligned. The strategic backdrop sharpens the picture. Europe keeps saying no concessions, Kyiv keeps saying no compromises. Yet, rail crews and air defense crews are the ones doing the real work while speeches are drafted for Alaska. The rail map is honest even when politicians are not. If trains slow through the Dnipro heartland, the Donbass front will feel it within days. And where the trains lead, the lines tighten, especially around Pokrovsk and Lyman. On the right flank of Pokrovsk, Russian advances have been described, without exaggeration, as severe. Lyman is not as spectacular, but it is relentless. In and around the Serebryansky forest, the fight has shifted from static defense to methodical pressure, with Russian units nibbling across tree lines and forcing withdrawals that break continuity. To the north and east, the Siversk sector keeps flashing, Bilo-Horivka on one shoulder, Kryhorivka on another, Vyimka in the foreground, and the Seversky Donets running like a hard boundary that channels movement. This is classic Russian operational art: fix on one axis, threaten a pincer on the next, and turn flat maps into convex traps. Veterans remember February 2015, when Debaltseve became a pressure cooker. The geometry today around Pokrovsk does not need to be identical to Rhine. An encirclement strategy is not about chasing headlines, it is about preserving force. If you can compel an opponent to abandon positions because supply is strangled or flanks are bent, you win without paying full price in casualties. That is how a patient army fights. Western media prefer one-day swings. This is a 30-day, 60-day discipline. Kyiv knows it. That is why reserves get pulled from Kharkiv, from Kherson, from Zaporizhia, and fed back into a furnace that does not stop burning just because cameras swivel toward an Alaska runway. Meanwhile, social mobilization has hit a wall inside Ukraine. Even sympathetic analysts admit that political and economic stress is biting hard. One of Zelensky's best-known former advisors, Oleksiy Arestovich, even claimed that as many as 15,000 people are fleeing the country each day, an unverified number, yes, but one that captures the mood of strain. Compare that with Russia's position: deeper reserves, functioning industry, external partners in China and India who have not stepped back under Western pressure, and domestic stability that looks dull but wins wars. The net effect on the ground is a slow turn of the screw. Today it looks like skirmishes through a forest belt. Tomorrow it can look like a pocket forming. The day after, a town that mattered becomes a line on a communique about consolidation of positions. And that brings us to Alaska, the place where speeches meet maps and where maps usually win. Let us be blunt. Reports in European media floated a fantasy trade. Russia leaves Kherson or Zaporizhia if Ukraine pulls back from Donbass. Washington commentators promptly poured cold water on that idea, noting that the Kremlin will not abandon the land bridge to Crimea. At the same time, a German outlet suggested that Moscow could push for a demilitarized belt all the way to the Dnipro River on the East Bank, an idea less about cartography than about missiles and standoff ranges. None of this means a durable settlement is near. In fact, most seasoned diplomats expect months of theater and possibly years of haggling. Meanwhile, an Alaska meeting gives President Trump optics and an opening to talk about something real: arms control. If the United States wants a win that does not concede terrain, a ceiling on certain categories of missiles would look like prudence, not retreat. And if Russia wants a win that does not dilute battlefield gains, binding Washington into verifiable limits while keeping rail node pressure in Donbass is as good as it gets. Europe is nervous not because it has been excluded, but because its leverage has melted away. Kyiv is nervous because, absent new brigades and new stocks, any ceasefire that freezes current lines would harden into a map it does not like. In that light, the recent spikes in drone numbers, the 10 missile, Storm Shadow demonstration, the Sinelnikov rail attack, and the repeated hits on Chernihiv area positions all read as stage directions. Each side wants to arrive in Alaska with a story to tell. Only one arrives with momentum on the ground. As Scott Ritter put it in one of his more controversial but undeniably relevant judgments, NATO has been expanding non-stop. And one of the reasons we are at war in Ukraine is because NATO wanted to bring Ukraine under its umbrella. You can disagree with his politics. The practical consequence is beyond dispute. Expansion without equilibrium invites crises that end at negotiating tables where the map decides the script. If there is a ceasefire window after Alaska, expect timelines discussed in days and weeks, not in grand heroic months, 30 here, 40 there, maybe 50 to let everyone claim a line or two of poetry for their domestic audiences. But ceasefires that do not solve logistics do not last, and rails that keep getting hit do not lie. Which leaves us with a sober reminder as the camera fades to black. The Alaska summit may produce a hand clasp and a headline. It may even sketch a narrow, useful lane on missiles that lowers risk without touching maps. That would be wise, and it would be enough for now. But wars end when logistics run out, not when microphones switch off. Tonight's facts are clear. A Ukrainian attempt to surge long-range pressure, Russian air defenses turning the night into numbers, rails in the Dnipro heartland under repeated stress, ground lines tightening around Pokrovsk and through the forests near Lyman. Europe warns against deals over its head, yet offers few levers beyond punctuation. Kyiv insists on principles, yet runs short of forces and time. Moscow speaks less, moves more, and keeps pressure on the places that matter. Near the end of his own long argument with Western Orthodoxy, Scott Ritter framed the only red line that truly counts. You cannot win a nuclear war, it should never be fought. Arms control is not a concession, it is oxygen. If President Trump can carve even a narrow agreement there, the world will be safer even as the front remains hot. Until then, remember what the rails, the drones, and the maps already told you. Comment below, what do you think is actually achievable in Alaska? Real limits on missiles, a short ceasefire to reset logistics, or just another photo for the archive? Stay sharp. The next update will not come from a podium, it will come from the railway timetable.